This is Session 3 of Fighting the Good Fight, a seminar on managing church conflict by Reverend Chris Ball. This session is titled Managing Conflict.
Welcome back. In another session, I've been talking about managing conflict. And in that session, I talked about the definition of conflict. I also gave several different types of conflict. In fact, I went to a great deal to help the listener understand where conflict comes from, because you need to begin, in order to manage conflict, to understand the various types of conflict and so forth. But in this session, I'm actually going to talk about 5 conflict management styles. We need to understand that each of us approach conflict in a different way. Now, I have learned over time, and I'm going to illustrate this in just a few minutes, but I've learned over time that everybody approaches conflict differently, but there's actually no right way to accomplish solving a conflict, because most of the time we come to a conflict with a different personality, and different personalities will contribute to that conflict management effectively. So what I'm going to do is set up a scenario for you, and I want you to think about yourself as I go through this teaching. I'm going to give you several different conflict styles. You're going to probably find yourself in one of them. And I also want to warn you, in different conflict situations, you might use a different style. But each of these styles has a negative and positive expression. The goal here then is to find out, number one, what style I might have and how I might use my style in solving conflicts. And when would it be necessary to use that conflict style? Let me give you a scenario. Just imagine if you're in a board meeting, and if you're pastoring a church of any size, you're going to have a board, I would hope. And in that board meeting, you're in the meeting, and so are the elders in the meeting, and maybe there's 5 or 6 people in the meeting. And the topic that we're going to discuss is this: how much to pay the new assistant pastor. Are we going to pay the assistant pastor how much money? Now, again, I know that I'm used to using dollars and cents, but the truth of the matter is, when you come to that kind of a discussion, you're going to have a lot of different opinions about what the pastor should be paid. So let's just use a number. Let's say we want to pay the pastor $20,000 a year. That's a safe number to at least think about. Now, there are going to be people in that room that think this is not enough to pay an assistant pastor. We should be paying him a lot more. He's giving 40 hours of his time. She or he are giving many hours of their time in ministry, as well as working beyond the required time. There are going to be others that say, wait a minute, $20,000? That's way too much. He's just an assistant. He's not a real pastor. Our church doesn't have that kind of money. That would put us on the very edge. Again, you're going to have all kinds of different opinions that will either circle around either one of those two responses. And then there are going to be questions that go beyond that. Either way, this could create and present a conflict. And that's when we begin to talk about different conflict styles. Now, again, just imagine you're in that room, and the questions you're going to be asking while I teach this is, number one, what is my management style of conflict? How would I solve this problem? Because you've got all kinds of disagreement about how much to pay the assistant pastor. Let me give you 5 different management conflict styles. The first one is a person that's sitting in the room, and we will call that person the avoider. They're avoiding conflict. They're just listening. They are not wanting to get involved. They don't like to talk about this. They're a little bit afraid to say their opinion. And this person handles conflict by avoiding it. And it usually isn't a good way of handling conflict. Their motto, the avoider, would say, I will stay out of this conflict. In other words, I don't want anything to do with this discussion. I'm just going to be a listener. Their intent is to stay completely out of the conflict altogether. They don't want to get involved. Now, their action is unassertive or passive. By that I mean, if they are asked a question by the other people in the room, they're not going to be very assertive. They're going to say, well, I think we should pray about it. That's usually a spiritual way sometimes to avoid conflict. Obviously, praying about it can be a good thing, but sometimes people even use spiritual things to avoid conflict because they're an avoider. They want to stay away from it. They're passive. They want to get around it. Now, the results in this kind of a conflict are you lose and I lose. And here's why. Because I haven't given you my opinion, I haven't contributed, so I don't gain anything. Nor do you gain anything in that kind of conflict because you haven't heard what I feel about it. The passive or avoiding person ends up having the results. You lose, I lose. Now, I've learned that there is a time when there needs to be an avoidance in conflict. There needs to be a time when we would literally stay out of the conflict, if you will. And that is when the issue is really insignificant, when it's not your responsibility to really solve the conflict. So, for example, you might be in the room, but in that particular discussion or that particular area of conflict, it might not be anything you should give your opinion about. So, for example, you could be a gentleman in the room and you're talking about the ladies department in your church, the ladies ministry, and you really don't have an opinion on how the ladies should run this meeting or that meeting. So in that case, the way you would manage that conflict is to stay completely out of it. So this, again, is the pattern I'm going to take you through on each of these different management styles. I'm going to show you a model. The passive one would say, I'm staying out of it. I'm going to show you the intent to stay out of it completely, the action to be passive, unassertive, the results, you lose and I lose, and then finally, I will give you an appropriate use. Let me give you the second area of conflict management or second management style. It's the accommodator or the accommodating style. Now, this person is going to say this, I will give in. I will give in. Their motto is, I'm giving in. I'm not going to fight. I'll just do whatever you guys want to do. It's a little different than the passive because you give an opinion. But you're basically saying, I'm going to accommodate you. Whatever you guys decide, you go ahead and settle it, but I'm going to accommodate you in this. The reason and the intent for this kind of management style is to preserve relationship at any cost. I want you to know this is not a bad thing because there are times that you don't want to have an argument, and because of the sake of the relationship, you're going to say, whatever you decide, I just want to make sure we keep our relationship. The action of somebody who's using the accommodating style is to embrace everyone involved in the conflict. This person who says, I want to accommodate, is interesting to make sure that everyone around the room feels loved and cared for. That's not a bad thing, but sometimes this isn't a healthy style to use in fixing or solving a problem because you embrace everyone around the room, but in some ways you haven't given your heart or your opinion in the situation. So here's the results when you use the accommodating style. You win and I lose. See, the avoider, everybody loses because nobody gets the opinion. But when I give in, you win and I lose, which basically means now I've allowed you to win this particular side of the argument. And it's not really that bad because I want you to know that my relationship with you is more important. So the appropriate use of this kind of conflict is when I either have a weak position on a particular issue, go back to the issue of a guy of the board talking about the finances, and you say, really, I don't have a position on this. I just want to bless them. I don't really have a strong position, so I'm not going to contribute to the discussion. So in that conflict, I go ahead and say, you go ahead and decide. But here's the real reason that people do this and use this accommodating mindset is so that when they're in the situation, that the long-term relationship takes precedent over the issue at hand. So in other words, I'm going to give in to your will, your desire, your choice about what we pay the assistant pastor, because ultimately, if I give my real opinion, I don't want to do that because I value my relationship with you. That's called the accommodating. So we have the avoiding, style, where we avoid it altogether. Then we have the accommodating, where we accommodate the relationship. Number 3, this to me is one that we should try to strive towards, given how I tend to handle conflict, and that is called the collaborator. This person is got the management style called collaborating. And this person's motto is, let's work together for everyone's good. Now, this is a very often where pastors who are caring and loving tend to be. They want to make sure that everybody's working together for not just the individual assistant pastor, but for everyone's good. What's good for the church? What's good for the budget? What's good for the pastor? What's good for the pastor's family, the assistant pastor family? What's good for us as a deacon board? What's good for us as an eldership board? I want to make my decision based on let's work towards everyone's good. This is called a collaborator. Now, their intent is to achieve a win for all parties. In other words, I want you to win, I want you to win. You think the pastor shouldn't get paid that much, but I really want you to win. And you think the pastor should get paid more, I really want you to win. So the decisions and the way that you try to solve the problem is with the ultimate goal of saying, let's have a win for all parties. Now, the action is this, to be assertive but flexible. In other words, I'm going to give you my opinion, but I'm not going to hold so tight to it that you can't change my opinion. That's the goal of the collaborator. I'll share strongly, I believe we should do this, but if you come up with another point, I'm going to be flexible. This is the style that seems to be most common for me because I like to be flexible and teachable in the midst of conflict. The results are you win, and I win. That's the results in this kind of conflict. In other words, I feel like, okay, I was flexible. You were able to get your point across. I was able to get my point across. And the end result is we've tried to hear each other, and you win and I win. This is a collaborator. Now, there is an appropriate use to use this. Number one is it's always it's one that you would use in situations where you're trying to say, we have to solve this problem and decision about the assistant pastor's salary, for example. We need to solve that because we've hired him and he is going to be working for us, but we want everybody in the room to feel comfortable with the decision. So this is when we would use this. And again, it really adapts to that long-term relationship because when the end of the day it is done, when we've thought through everything, the goal is that we all leave the room feeling that we're working together. That's the collaborator. So I've talked to you about avoiding. I've talked to you about accommodating. I've talked to you about collaborating. Different styles of conflict management. And each of us have different styles. Then there's the compromiser. The person that's compromising. Oh, this is one that I've seen a lot of times in meetings that I've been a part of. And this is a person that now begins to have a conviction about how much we should pay the assistant pastor, for example. But all of a sudden, in the heat of the argument, they begin to compromise their convictions, and they step back away, and they aren't really giving their honest opinion because at that point they've compromised their convictions. This is the motto of the compromiser. I will meet you halfway. My goal is to meet you halfway. The intent is to have a give and take relationship, not a collaborating relationship where everybody gets to contribute, but a give and take. You give and I'll take, or you take and I'll give. It's a give and take relationship. Okay, maybe we could start him out at $28,000 a year for 6 months, and then at the end of that 6 months, we can increase it to $30,000. That way, you've got your way and I've got my way. It's a give and take. It's compromising. Let's come to a compromise. Let me just take a break from this and say that all of this teaching could be applied to marriages too. You know, we have people in marriages that avoid. We have people in marriages in conflict that they accommodate and then they collaborate. But compromising is very often given as a tool to help people in a conflict in a marriage relationship. May I just make a statement and say this to you? I'm not sure this is completely the best one to use in an area of marriage, nor do I think it's always the best one to use in church. But because there is a give and take, we need to be careful that we're not compromising spiritual individual convictions, say, of a husband or a wife. But in the context of our story here, where we're talking about the assistant pastor's salary, it could very well be a style of management of conflict that would work for you. Give and take. Now, the action of a give and take person is a negotiator, and that this is how that dialogue might go in solving that kind of situation. It says, okay, how about $28,000 for 6 months and $30,000 for the rest? And they say, well, no, maybe we should go with $27,000 for the 6 months and then $29,000. And they're all over the place until they finally settle the conflict with a decision. But again, it's a style of how to resolve the conflict through compromise. Now, here's the results. You win some, and I win some. In other words, I don't win it all, and nor do you win it all. We both are willing to sacrifice a part of the win. So that happens in this. And so it might end up being actually that the assistant pastor in this case won't win at all. But at least in the relationship that we're having in solving the conflict as an eldership team, everyone feels like, okay, well, we all gave a little bit in the aspect of solving this conflict. So the result is you win some and I win some. Now again, as I've been sharing with you, I feel that there's an appropriate use for this style of conflict at different times. Let me share with you when I think this is appropriate, and that is when collaboration fails and then you move on to compromise. In other words, if we started with a collaboration where we said, look, let's have a win-win, but it didn't really work. It's like there's no settling for a win-win. We don't want a win-win because somebody just cannot give in to the answer that's potentially on the table for a win-win solution. So when that doesn't work, and we've been working at it, the next question you'll ask is, okay, can we settle on a compromise? Can we do something different? Let me take it away from the context of the local church and bring it into a marriage again. The question is, okay, how about the conflict that might come up in a marriage where you say, okay, whose family are we going to visit for Christmas? Is it going to be the wife's family, or is it going to be the husband's family? So that's a good conflict that can come up in marriage. And where a collaboration would be that maybe what we'll do is we'll go to your family in the morning and we'll go to your family in the afternoon, so that both families are visited on Christmas Day, right? That's kind of called a collaboration. But let's say that there's not a happiness in that because the families are saying, we want more time with you, and then all kinds of things that come up. What I think a compromise could be is when you say, okay, well then this year we will go to your family, and next year we will go to your husband's family, the other person's family. And in this case, there's a serious loss in both cases. That's another example of what it means to compromise. So, compromising in a conflict is a way to solve it. And sometimes it works when collaboration doesn't work. It's another step away from what I would consider the best, because the collaboration is a win-win, and that's my goal usually. But compromising is not bad. It just helps solve the problem and come up with it. So in the case of what are we going to pay for this assistant pastor, are we going to compromise? I'll meet you halfway. That's the motto. The intent, to give and take. And then the action, to be a negotiator. The person who's usually a collaborator, they talk to everybody in the room and they say, okay, what do you think, Sam? What do you think, Fred? What do you think, John? And they collaborate the terms of what we're going to pay the assistant pastor, and everybody doesn't win. Some win, and everyone wins, but it's not a complete win for everyone. Now, let me give you the last one. It's called competing. This is the competitor. This person here, their motto is, I'm going to get my way. This is a person in the room that's bound and determined to have a strong opinion. Let me give you some of the opinions that the competitor might have. The competitor might be the person in the room and they believe that the pastor should get $30,000 a year instead of $20,000 a year. They're absolutely convinced that we are a cheap church and we should be paying that pastor $30,000 instead of $20,000. So they're going to go all out to win. That's a competitor. The competitor could also be on the other side of the spectrum and say, I believe 20,000 is a fair number, and that's what we're going to go after. But again, the conflict is, what do we pay? Because there's difference of opinions of what we pay. But now all of a sudden, that competitor is saying, I am stuck on 20,000 a year, and I'm immovable. I'm not going to do it. Their motto, again, is, I will get my way. It's going to go my way, or you're going to go away. That's sort of the mindset. What is their intent? To win. To win. Now let me tell you something. In a context of marriage, I'm going to take you back there. Because listen, in a context of marriage, if you have this attitude, and you have an attitude, I'm going to win, sometimes everybody loses. Because if you're saying, I'm going to compete and I'm going to win, lives can be destroyed. And so can lives be destroyed over issues of conflict in a church setting, in an eldership setting. So the intent is to win. Now, what's the action of a competitor? The action is to be assertive and, if necessary, even domineering. The idea here is I'm going to get my way. And I'm going to dominate. In fact, this person will dominate the conversation. There's 12 people in the room, 6 people in the room, and it's almost like nobody else gets to talk. Nobody else gets an opportunity. And so this person's way of solving their problem is domineering. And so in the case of it being domineering, what happens is they rule the room. They're strong. Every time somebody speaks, they come back real strong with an answer, and they domineer the whole room in conversation. They become assertive with their opinions. Again, take it back to marriage. It happens in couples. Usually if a person is a competitor and they're in a dialogue as a husband and wife, one of those people, if they're a competitor, they don't ever give the spouse time to talk. They never listen. They're strong with their opinion. And again, this is a way some people solve their conflict. And again, it's an assertive, domineering mindset. So what are the results in this situation? I'll show you the results. If I'm the assertive and I'm the competitive person, the results are I win and you lose. Somebody walks out of the room feeling that they have lost the argument. They have lost the conflict. And somebody walks out of the room saying, I finally got that. It went my way. Please hear me. This is not usually a healthy way of dealing with conflict in a church. In fact, it's a very damaging way. And in the context of marriage, very often it's a damaging way. Because who wants to be the partner in a marriage who feels like they lost in a conflict? Nobody wants to lose. Now, as I have been saying, there is an appropriate use, though. There is an appropriate use of even a competing type of conflict. Let me give you it. It's an appropriate use when a decision has to be made. A decision has to be made. Let me go back to the story and illustration to make my point. When a competitive solution is the way to go. Let's say that it's December 30th, and you're hiring the pastor on January 1st. We don't have much more time to discuss this situation. We've been talking about it for months. How much are we going to pay the pastor? $20,000, $30,000, $15,000? How much are we going to pay the assistant pastor? Now the decision has to be made because he starts work in 2 days. Now, this is when a domineering, a competing individual in the room may need to be strong and say, listen, decision must be made now, and I say we pay him $30,000, or I say we pay him $10,000. Whatever the situation is, whatever the result is, what causes this particular style of management to be useful is when a decision needs to be made. Same in a marriage. Very often a husband and wife will wrestle again over, do we go to your parents' house or our parents' house for Christmas? Well, if it's Christmas Eve, decision has to be made by tomorrow. So again, a competing, challenging response to a conflict may be necessary because we have to make a decision tomorrow. A decision is definitely going to be made. Where are we going to go? Sometimes that decision is, we're going to stay home and we're not going anywhere. But either way, a decision has to be made. So then the competing decision has to be decided because of the pressure of the moment. So what I've shared with you is different conflict ways to handle conflict. Because, see, there's no right way to handle conflict. There are many different ways. Sometimes you need to avoid conflict. Sometimes there'll be a conflict that you have no business getting involved in. You're in charge of the youth group, then you don't need to be involved in any of the conflict that's taking place in the children's ministry or in the adult ministry, because your speciality is working with the youth. So you need to know that there is an appropriate time to be an avoider, but be careful that when you are an avoider, when it's a conflict that you're involved in that does matter what you think, that in that avoiding, that you don't find yourself losing something because of your avoidance. You can't give up your convictions. You must hold to your convictions in a loving way. So there is sometimes when that would work. And remember, there are styles of using accommodating. When we're saying, our relationship is so much more important than the answer on the table, and so I'm just going to accommodate you. I'm going to show you love. That, in particular, in my opinion, is where, in the context of marriage, it really is very often needed to be used, because you are called to spend the rest of your life with your partner, and so why do you feel like I need to be a control over some of the items that are on the table, some of the things that we are finding ourselves in conflict with? It is so crucial that sometimes you pick the accommodating style of conflict management so that you can save the relationship. And then the collaborator. Again, I already mentioned to you that in the collaborator, that there needs to be times when we would say, okay, I need to be a collaborator. Again, this is the one that I tend to lean to the most, because the results of a collaborator is a you win and all of us win. We're trying to find out how everyone can win. But there are going to be situations when there is no possibility that everybody can win in the room. So we have to be willing to face the conflict as with an honest and integrity approach. So collaborating. Then there might be that time when you will want to consider compromising. Compromising says that you win some and I win some. In other words, everybody is willing to give up something. I'm not willing to get it all my way. And that's another way to handle conflict, is to say, you know what, I don't have to have everything go my way. How can we work this out together where maybe I win some and you win some? Again, it's not just you win and I win, but we win some because there's been some level of giving up in the issue of the conflict. And then finally, that competitor. Let me just exhort you, Pastor. I think that we need to be very, very careful not to be known as a competitor in everything. Not to be known as a competitor. People want to know that they've been heard in the midst of conflict. People need to know that in the sense of conflict, there is a voice. Their voice has been heard, and their position has been at least well understood. You may need to have many different meetings. I suggest that if you have the time and a decision doesn't have to be made, that you schedule several meetings where if it starts to escalate and the anger in the room starts to get frustrated, that you say, time out, let's table this. Let's make some rules here in the conflict, that we don't allow people to strike at each other personally, that we schedule a time where that conflict can be rescheduled for another time, and say we have 3 months to make this decision. Let's not rush this decisions. So, Pastor, be very, very, very careful not to be that competitor, that competing person where you feel like, I've got to solve this now. You don't always have to solve it now. Now, there are times when you as a pastor or somebody in the room must make the decision. In that case, when a decision has to be made, use the competing style of conflict resolution. You know, it's not the presence of conflict that really causes chaos. If you think about it, it's not the presence of conflict or the experience of conflict that causes disaster. What usually causes disaster in the presence of conflict is how we handle it. How do we handle conflict? In closing, I want to just share with you just briefly a couple things that you need to do. Number one, if you're handling conflict and you want to have that conflict within the context of all these management styles that I've shared with you, a good thing to do is actually schedule a time where you know there's a neutral place, where people feel free. They're not threatened. You can't be arguing about something when they're over the pastor's house. That level of discussion about a salary for an assistant pastor cannot be, the meeting cannot be held in a place where there's a leverage to one of the people in the room. It needs to be in a neutral place. So schedule a time in a neutral place so that people are willing to do it. Pray. Make sure you pray before you discuss as a group. I mean, God sometimes in the midst of hearing all the different opinions and the different answers towards what we're going to pay this assistant pastor will sometimes prophetically speak in the room. He will give a word from somebody that's usually passive if we allow room for everyone in the room to have a voice. So pray before we begin the discussion. And then, so pick a time, pick a neutral place, pray in the meeting. Study. Come into the meeting well educated. Come in well thought through. Don't come in with anger and frustration. Come in saying, I'm willing to learn, but having studied about the particular topic or the issue of conflict. Do not, number 4, allow things to be fought out of ignorance. Study. Number 5, make sure that you're sensitive to the people, that you're not attacking each other, but always talking about the issue. It's so easy in conflict to move from dealing with the issue and moving from the issue to where we begin to attack people. In my board meetings, in particular, I have raised a new policy that if I hear something that seems unfair or out of order, that what I will do is I will say, I'm calling a foul. What I mean by that is I'm saying, stop. We need to stop right now. You have begun to move from dealing with the issue to where you're attacking the person. And I give everybody an opportunity to think about that. And everybody's open to the mindset of, okay, we cannot attack each other as a way to solve a problem. We need to be sensitive to that. And then finally, once you have come to a resolution, thank people. Pastor, if you're leading that discussion, thank the people for their contribution. And if it's very, very clear that in the room, because a style was needed to where somebody might not get their way, they may not get their answer, thank them for contributing to the conflict resolution. Thank them and saying, though we didn't go your way, though the result didn't end up exactly how you thought it would, I want to thank you for contributing to this situation. Please listen to me. My heart is that you, like Jesus, would allow conflict not be something that would divide, but something that would cause you to mature and grow. That's the reason that Jesus came into the temple. That's the reason that Jesus confronted the Pharisees. That's the reason that Jesus confronted the disciples, is he wanted to see maturity and spiritual growth. You will have conflict, Pastor. There's no doubt about it. There will be conflict in your church. Anytime you have human beings working together with different opinions, different personalities, different visions, different goals, all the causes of conflict that I spoke about earlier, you will have times when you see that conflict be a part of your ministry. But your job as the pastor is to manage conflict well, manage conflict effectively. I've given you today 5 different management styles. Remember, ask yourself, which style do I tend to move in mostly? Am I the avoider? Am I the accommodator? Am I the collaborator? Am I the compromiser? Or am I the competitor? The question is, what style do I use? All of these styles might have their place in certain situations. The question is, what do you lean towards most of the time, and what do you feel that maybe God wants to adjust in certain times for different conflicts? My prayer is that, Pastor, you would set the standard for healthy conflict management. It's been my privilege. God bless you.